The two friends of the person you love saw your photo and shared their strong opinions about you. Something changed in the room the moment your photo appeared on the screen. Two people were sitting across from each other, casually talking about life, relationships, and the strange decisions people make when their feelings become impossible to ignore. There was laughter at first. Nothing serious. Nothing that seemed important. Until the person you love quietly pulled out their phone and showed them your picture. The conversation stopped. One friend leaned closer to the screen. The other didn't say anything for several seconds. They simply looked at your face, then looked back at the person you love with an expression that seemed to ask, "Are you serious about this person?" And what happened after that wasn't what anyone expected. Because instead of giving a polite compliment, one of them said something remarkably direct. Something that revealed they had already noticed how deeply this person had been affected by you. But there was another opinion coming, and that second opinion was about to hit much closer to home. Stay with this, because the reason they reacted so strongly to your photo may tell you more about your connection than you realize. The first friend slowly handed the phone back. They had that look people get when they're trying to understand something that suddenly makes sense. They weren't judging your appearance. They were studying the story behind the picture. The way you looked. The expression on your face. Even the small details in the photo that most people would overlook. Then they turned to the person you love and asked a simple question: "Is this really the person you've been talking about?" There was a pause. And that pause said more than a long explanation could have. The person you love didn't immediately answer. Instead, they smiled, a quiet, almost embarrassed smile, and looked down for a moment. Their friends noticed it instantly. They had apparently seen this reaction before. Whenever your name came up, something changed. Their voice softened. Their attention shifted. Their usual confidence disappeared for just a second. That was when the second friend finally spoke. And their opinion was completely different. They said they understood why this person couldn't stop thinking about you. But then they pointed out something unexpected about your photo, something they believed revealed the kind of person you were beneath everything people could see on the surface. Their words made the person you love sit up and listen carefully. Because apparently, these two friends weren't simply looking at a picture. They were trying to understand why you mattered so much. And just when the conversation seemed to be settling down, one of them asked the question nobody in that room was prepared to answer. "Have you actually told them how you feel?" The room went quiet again. Because suddenly, your photo wasn't the subject anymore. You were. The question hung in the air longer than anyone expected. For a moment, the person you love didn't move. Their phone was still in their hand, your photo glowing softly on the screen. One friend watched them carefully. The other leaned back, almost as if they already knew the answer. Finally, they gave a small laugh and said, "It's complicated." But their friends didn't accept that explanation. They had heard "complicated" before. They wanted to know what was actually happening. Then the first friend said something that changed the tone of the entire conversation. "You don't look at everyone like that." Silence. The person you love looked up. Their friend continued, explaining that there was a noticeable difference whenever your name came up. With other people, they could talk casually. With you, they became thoughtful, protective, sometimes even nervous. And now their friends understood why. They weren't looking at your photo as a random picture anymore. They were connecting it to all those little stories they'd heard over time. The conversations. The memories. The moments your name appeared unexpectedly. And suddenly, those details seemed to form one much bigger picture. But then the second friend offered their own strong opinion. They said your photo gave them the impression that you weren't someone who would be satisfied with empty words. You seemed like the kind of person who would notice actions, consistency, and sincerity. That observation made the person you love unusually quiet. Because apparently, it touched something they had been thinking about privately. They knew their friends were right. Maybe that was why they hadn't rushed toward you. Maybe they weren't unsure about you at all. Maybe they were worried about whether they could give you the kind of honesty you deserved. And here's where the conversation became surprisingly emotional. The first friend asked, "What are you waiting for?" This time, there was no joking answer. The person you love looked at your picture again and admitted that they didn't want to approach you carelessly. They didn't want to make a promise they weren't ready to keep. They wanted whatever happened between you to mean something. One friend smiled. The other simply nodded. Then came a sentence that nobody expected, "Then stop treating this like something you can figure out forever." That line landed differently. Because sometimes the people closest to us can see the truth before we're brave enough to admit it ourselves. And if you're enjoying this story, you can quietly share it with someone who understands what it feels like when two people care deeply but neither knows what the other is truly thinking. And if these kinds of emotional stories speak to you, you're always welcome to stay connected here. But the conversation wasn't over. Not even close. Because the second friend suddenly picked up the phone again, looked at your picture one more time, and said, "There's something about this person you haven't told us." The person you love froze. Their eyes moved away from the screen. And for the first time that night, neither friend was smiling. Because whatever they were about to reveal wasn't based on your photo anymore. It was based on something they'd already heard about you. Something the person you love had apparently never intended for their friends to bring up. The room became strangely quiet after those words. The person you love stared at their friends as if trying to figure out exactly what they knew. One of them noticed the hesitation immediately and said, "We're not trying to put you on the spot. We're just saying, we've noticed things." That was the moment the conversation shifted from curiosity to something much more personal. They weren't talking about your picture anymore. They were talking about the way this person had been behaving whenever you came up. The first friend remembered a conversation from earlier, a moment when your name appeared on the phone and the entire expression of the person you love changed within seconds. They had smiled without realizing it. Then they had quickly put the phone away, pretending nothing happened. Their friend had teased them about it at the time, but now the memory suddenly seemed important. The second friend remembered something else, how carefully they spoke about you. Never casually. Never carelessly. There was always a strange softness underneath their words, as though they were afraid that saying too much might reveal what they were trying to hide. Then came the strongest opinion of the night. One friend looked directly at them and said, "I think you're more afraid of losing this person than you are willing to admit." No argument followed. Just silence. And that silence became the answer. Because sometimes a person can deny their feelings with words, but their reactions tell a completely different story. The person you love looked back at your photo and took a slow breath. Their friend could see the conflict on their face. There was affection there, but also uncertainty. Not uncertainty about you. Uncertainty about what would happen if they finally stopped holding everything back. The second friend leaned forward and said something surprisingly reassuring. "Then don't make it complicated. If this person matters to you, let them know." For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then the person you love admitted something they hadn't said before. They confessed that they had imagined what it would feel like to finally tell you everything. They had pictured the conversation more than once. They had even thought about what they would say first. But every time they came close to taking that step, fear made them pull back. Not fear of you. Fear of changing everything. And that's the detail you need to notice. Because their friends weren't criticizing you. They weren't warning them away from you. In fact, both friends seemed increasingly convinced that you were someone worth taking seriously. One even said that your photo made them understand why this person had been so distracted lately. Then, almost casually, the first friend asked one final question. "If you had one chance to tell them exactly what you've been feeling, what would you say?" The person you love looked down. Their fingers tightened slightly around the phone. And after several seconds, they finally answered. What they said next was so honest that even their two closest friends stopped interrupting. Because it revealed the one thing they had been hiding, not from their friends, but from you. For the first time that evening, the person you love stopped trying to explain themselves. They looked at your photo and spoke quietly, almost as though they were saying the words for themselves before saying them to anyone else. They admitted that what they felt for you wasn't a passing curiosity. It had stayed with them through ordinary days, busy moments, and even the times when they tried to distract themselves from thinking about you. Their friends exchanged a quick glance. They'd suspected it, but hearing it out loud made everything feel different. Then the first friend asked, "So why haven't you told them?" The answer came slowly. "Because I don't know if they feel the same." That sentence revealed something important. The person you love wasn't necessarily waiting for a perfect moment. They were waiting for reassurance. They had been reading your actions, remembering conversations, replaying small moments, and wondering whether those moments meant as much to you as they did to them. Their friends immediately challenged that thinking. One pointed out that sometimes two people can spend so much time trying to protect themselves from disappointment that they accidentally hide the very feelings they hope the other person will notice. Then the second friend looked at your picture again. This time, their opinion became even more personal. They said, "I think you're making this harder than it needs to be. You don't need some perfect speech. You just need to be honest." The person you love smiled faintly. But there was still one hesitation. They asked what their friends honestly thought of you. Not what they thought of the situation. Not what they thought about the relationship. You. The first friend answered immediately. They said your photo gave them the impression of someone who had depth, someone who might not reveal everything at once, but who probably noticed more than people realized. The second friend agreed, adding that you seemed like the kind of person who would value genuine effort over dramatic promises. That opinion seemed to settle something inside them. Because suddenly, they weren't defending their feelings anymore. They were considering what to do with them. And this is where the conversation took an unexpected turn. One friend asked to see your photo again. They studied it for another moment and then said, "I understand now." The person you love looked confused. Understand what? Their friend smiled and explained that the strongest thing they noticed wasn't your appearance. It was the emotional reaction happening beside them. Every time they looked at your picture, their entire expression softened. Their voice changed when they talked about you. Even their posture became different. Their friends weren't just forming opinions about you. They were witnessing what you brought out in the person they cared about. Then came a final piece of advice. Don't wait until you're completely fearless, one friend said. You'll be waiting forever. That sentence stayed with them. The conversation eventually moved on, but something had shifted. The person you love wasn't looking at your photo the same way anymore. They weren't wondering whether their feelings were real. They were wondering whether it was finally time to let you know. And as they quietly locked their phone, one of their friends noticed something on the screen. A message draft. Your name was at the top. And the first sentence had already been written. The message was only a few words long, but the person who wrote it had already rewritten it several times. Their friend noticed the hesitation and asked what they were trying to say. They didn't answer immediately. Instead, they unlocked the phone again, opened the draft, and stared at the blinking cursor. The first line was simple, almost painfully simple. There's something I've been wanting to tell you. Then they stopped. Deleted it. Typed something else. Deleted that too. Their friends watched without teasing them this time. The second friend finally said, "You're thinking about how they'll react before you've even given them a chance to answer." That struck a nerve. Because it was true. The person you love had spent so much time imagining every possible outcome that they had forgotten one important thing: you weren't a prediction. You were a person. And no matter what happened next, honesty would at least replace uncertainty with something real. They looked at your photo again. Then they admitted something neither friend had expected. They said there had been a moment recently when they almost told you everything. They had been close. The conversation felt natural, the timing felt right, and for a few seconds, they thought they were finally going to say what had been sitting inside them for so long. But then the moment passed. And afterward, they regretted staying silent. Their first friend shook their head gently. Then maybe that's why you're still thinking about it. The room went quiet again. Because sometimes the things we don't say become the conversations we replay the most. And their friends weren't letting them escape into uncertainty anymore. One asked what they actually wanted from you. Not what they feared. Not what they thought might happen. What they wanted. The answer came almost immediately. I want a real chance. Those 4 words changed the atmosphere. There was no dramatic speech. No exaggerated promise. Just a quiet admission that underneath all the hesitation was a genuine desire to see where this connection could go. Then the first friend smiled and said, "That's what you should tell them." And for the first time that night, the person you love didn't argue. They simply opened your conversation. Their thumb hovered over the keyboard. One friend leaned back. The other looked away, giving them privacy. The room suddenly felt much smaller, almost as if the entire night had been leading toward this single moment. They began typing. This time, they didn't erase anything. They wrote about how often you crossed their mind. They wrote about how certain memories with you stayed longer than they expected. They wrote about the way talking to you felt different from talking to almost anyone else. Then they paused. Because there was one sentence left. The sentence they had been afraid to write. Their friends could see the hesitation return. And just before they finally pressed send, one of them quietly said, "If you're going to be honest, be completely honest." The person you love took a breath. Looked at your photo one final time. And typed the words they had been carrying for far longer than their friends realized. But what happened immediately after that message was sent was something none of the three of them expected. The screen went still. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The person you love had finally sent the message, and now there was nothing left to edit, nothing left to rehearse, nothing left to hide behind. Their friends watched as the familiar little silence stretched across the room. Then came the inevitable question, what if they don't answer? The person you love smiled nervously and said, "Then at least they'll finally know." But their friends weren't finished. The first friend looked at them and said something surprisingly comforting. "You didn't send that message to control the answer. You sent it because you were tired of pretending you didn't care." That seemed to calm them. Their shoulders relaxed. For the first time that evening, they weren't staring at your picture wondering what you thought. They were simply waiting. Then the phone vibrated. Everyone looked at the screen. It wasn't your reply. It was another notification. The person you love laughed nervously, and one friend jokingly told them to breathe. But underneath the humor, something had changed. Their friends had witnessed a side of them they rarely saw. Someone who usually seemed composed had become vulnerable because of you. And then the phone vibrated again. This time, it was your conversation. They didn't open it immediately. They stared at the notification for a few seconds, almost afraid that reading your response would make the moment real. Their first friend said, "Whatever it says, read it." Slowly, they opened the message. Their expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough for both friends to notice. Their eyes softened. A small smile appeared. They read the message again, then once more, as if making sure they hadn't misunderstood it. One friend immediately asked, "What did they say?" The person you love didn't answer. Instead, they turned the phone around. Their friends read the response. And suddenly, the two opinions they had shared earlier seemed even more meaningful. Because your response didn't reject the honesty. You didn't make fun of it. You didn't turn the moment into something awkward. You answered with the same sincerity they had finally shown you. The second friend smiled and said, "See? That's why I told you not to overthink it." The person you love leaned back, exhaling like someone who had been holding their breath for weeks. But then they noticed something else in your message. A single sentence. A sentence that suggested you had noticed more than they thought. Their smile disappeared for a moment. They read that line again. Then they looked at their friends and said, they knew. The first friend frowned. Knew what? The person you love looked back at your photo. That I cared. Neither friend spoke. Because now the entire conversation had taken on a completely different meaning. All those small reactions. All those moments of hesitation. All those times your name changed the atmosphere. Maybe you had been noticing them too. And just when everyone thought the night had reached its emotional peak, the second friend pointed at the phone and asked one final question. So, what are you going to say when you see them in person? The person you love looked at the screen. Then smiled. Because apparently, the message wasn't the ending. It was only the beginning. The next morning felt completely different. Nothing around the person you love had changed. The same room. The same phone. The same ordinary sounds.